Imagine a world without cities. No crowded streets, no stone towers, no glittering palaces. Instead, picture an endless sea of grass stretching as far as the eye can see. Rolling plains that rise and fall like ocean waves, winds carrying the smell of horses, smoke, and wildflowers. Across this vast expanse, riders appear like shadows. Fierce warriors clothed in furs and leather, armed with curved bows, moving as swiftly as the wind itself. To the people who lived in cities, behind high walls and guarded gates, these riders seemed like spirits of the wilderness. They struck suddenly without warning and disappeared back into the open horizon. These were the Scythians, a mysterious people who dominated the Eurasian Steppe for centuries. The Scythians did not build great cities, and they left behind no written histories of their own. Yet their influence echoed across continents. They terrified kings, fought empires, and traded gold and furs with the great powers of the ancient world. They were master horsemen, skilled archers, artists, and storytellers. To the Greeks, they were both feared barbarians and fascinating neighbors. To the Persians, they were an enemy impossible to conquer. To us, they are a civilization often forgotten, their legacy scattered like the winds of the steppe. Tonight, we will journey back into their world. We will explore who they were, how they lived, what they believed, and how their story became legend. This is the story of the Scythians, the lords of the ancient steppe. The Scythians emerged onto the stage of history around the 9th century BC. For nearly half a millennium, they ruled over a territory that stretched from the Black Sea in modern-day Ukraine, across southern Russia, and deep into Central Asia. This was the Eurasian Steppe, one of the largest grassland regions on Earth, stretching thousands of miles in every direction. For the Scythians, the steppe was both home and weapon. Unlike other civilizations of their time, the Scythians left behind no sprawling stone cities, no temples, no grand monuments. Instead, they carried their homes with them, moving with the seasons, always in search of new pastures for their herds. Their wealth was measured not in permanent buildings, but in the number of horses, cattle, and sheep they commanded. Their survival depended on mobility, skill with the bow, and the strength of family bonds. The little we know about the Scythians comes from two sources: the words of outsiders and the objects they left behind. Ancient Greek historians, especially Herodotus, wrote vivid, sometimes exaggerated accounts of the Scythians. To the Greeks, they were both terrifying and admirable, living a life of freedom that seemed wild compared to the order of city-states. The other source is archaeology, the treasures found in burial mounds known as kurgans. These frozen tombs, preserved for millennia in the permafrost of Siberia and Central Asia, hold golden jewelry, decorated weapons, fine textiles, and even the tattooed remains of Scythian men and women. Through these fragments, a picture begins to form, not of primitive barbarians, but of a people with a rich culture, spiritual depth, and artistic brilliance. A people who valued freedom and mobility above all, who became some of the greatest horsemen and archers the world had ever seen. In this journey, we will follow their story in 9 parts. We will begin with their origins, travel into their daily life, their art, and their myths. We will see them ride to war against Persia, trade with Greece, and eventually fade into history. By the end, perhaps you will see why these forgotten lords of the steppe deserve to be remembered. If you are enjoying this content so far, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends for more historical documentaries like this one. I appreciate your viewership and support, and we have a lot more on the way here at AFK History. Now back to the story. Chapter 1. Origins of the Scythians. The origins of the Scythians are shrouded in both myth and history. They emerged sometime around the 9th century BC, descending from a larger group of nomadic peoples who roamed the steppes of Central Asia. To the ancient world, the Scythians suddenly appeared like a storm, swift, unpredictable, and seemingly impossible to defeat. But their roots stretched back deep into the prehistoric movements of Indo-European peoples. The Scythians are believed to have spoken an Indo-Iranian language, closely related to the tongues of ancient Persians and Medes. Linguists and archaeologists suggest that their ancestors were part of the great Indo-European migrations, waves of peoples who spread from the grasslands north of the Black and Caspian Seas into Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia. While some Indo-Europeans settled and built kingdoms, the Scythians and their kin remained nomads. They embraced the open land, living in rhythm with the herds that sustained them. By the 9th century BC, Scythian tribes began moving westward from Central Asia into the Pontic steppe, the vast plains of what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. This migration brought them into contact with the civilizations of the Near East, including the Assyrians, Persians, and later the Greeks. From these encounters, the world began to take notice. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, devoted an entire book of his histories to the Scythians. He claimed that they were descended from a mythical figure named Scythes, son of Hercules, and a snake woman. According to Herodotus, this strange union produced 3 sons, and the youngest, Scythes, became the ancestor of the Scythian people. Though clearly myth, the story reflects how mysterious the Scythians appeared to outsiders. They seemed otherworldly, connected to beasts, gods, and the wild landscapes they inhabited. Archaeology paints a more grounded but equally fascinating picture. Excavations of Scythian kurgans, or burial mounds, reveal that by the 8th century BC, the Scythians already had a distinct culture. They buried their chiefs with weapons, gold ornaments, horses, and sometimes even servants. These elaborate burials show that social hierarchy and ritual were central to their way of life. They also reveal the Scythians' incredible craftsmanship, particularly in goldworking. DNA analysis from Scythian remains further confirms their origin as a blend of East and West. They were not a single homogeneous group, but a federation of tribes spread across thousands of miles. Some had features typical of European peoples, while others bore traits linked to Central and even East Asian groups. This diversity reflects their nomadic lifestyle, always moving, always mixing with new peoples, always adapting. The early Scythians were, above all, masters of the horse. While horses had been domesticated thousands of years earlier, the Scythians transformed them into the foundation of an entire civilization. Their mastery of horseback riding and the development of the composite bow allowed them to dominate vast territories with unmatched speed and precision. This combination of mobility and firepower would shape the destiny of every empire that came into contact with them. By the 7th century BC, Scythian power had grown so formidable that they invaded the Near East itself. They raided across Anatolia, threatened Assyrian cities, and were recorded in Assyrian texts as dangerous allies and foes. For nearly 30 years, they held sway over large parts of the Near East before retreating back to the steppe. This marked the Scythians not only as raiders, but as a force capable of influencing the course of great empires. Thus, from myth and migration, the Scythians emerged as a unique people, neither fully barbarian nor fully civilized in the way city dwellers understood. They were something else entirely, a mobile empire of the open plains. Chapter 2: Masters of the Steppe. To understand the Scythians, we must first understand the land that shaped them. The Eurasian Steppe is one of the most striking environments on Earth. Stretching from the Carpathian Mountains in Eastern Europe across Russia, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia, all the way to Manchuria in China, it is a sea of grass that rolls endlessly toward the horizon. Unlike forests, mountains, or deserts, the steppe offers no natural barriers. It is open, vast, and exposed, an ocean of grass instead of water. In this boundless landscape, survival required movement. Grasslands change with the seasons. In summer, pastures flourish. In winter, they wither under ice and snow. For the Scythians, the answer was to follow the cycles of nature, moving their herds of horses, cattle, and sheep from one pasture to the next. They lived as pastoral nomads, never tied to one place for long. This way of life made them uniquely suited to the steppe. While sedentary civilizations built walls and cities to protect themselves, the Scythians carried their world with them. Their homes were yurts and tents, made of felt and wood, light enough to be packed onto wagons and moved with the herds. Families, livestock, and possessions traveled together, rolling caravans that seemed to glide across the horizon. At the heart of this life was the horse. For the Scythians, the horse was not just an animal. It was wealth, status, transportation, and weapon. Horses provided milk, sometimes meat, and hides. They pulled wagons, carried riders, and even went to the grave alongside their masters. A man without a horse was a man stripped of power, while a man with many horses could command respect and authority. The Scythians did not merely ride horses. They lived with them, cared for them, and trained them from a young age. Scythian children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. By the time they reached adulthood, they were expert riders, able to shoot arrows while galloping at full speed. Their composite bows, small, powerful, and perfect for horseback use, gave them deadly accuracy. This mastery of mounted warfare made the Scythians the terror of the steppe. No heavy infantry or slow-moving army could stand against their mobility. If confronted, they could simply disappear into the vast plains, outlasting their enemies with ease. Their tactics relied on hit-and-run attacks, encircling foes, showering them with arrows, and retreating before counterattacks could land. To city dwellers, used to standing armies and sieges, this style of warfare was bewildering and terrifying. Yet the Scythians were not only warriors, they were also traders. Their mobility allowed them to connect distant worlds. They carried furs, slaves, and horses from the steppe to Greek colonies on the Black Sea, where they traded for wine, pottery, and crafted goods. They acted as middlemen between Asia and Europe, long before the Silk Road fully developed. Their ability to move quickly and cover vast distances gave them a unique role in ancient economies. Still, it was their reputation as warriors that defined them. Even the mighty Persian Empire, one of the greatest powers of the ancient world, struggled to deal with the Scythians. When Darius the Great marched a massive army into the steppe in 513 BC, the Scythians refused to meet him in open battle. Instead, they retreated deeper and deeper into the plains, burning grass, destroying wells, and denying the Persians food and water. The Persians, burdened by supply lines and unfamiliar with the endless land, found themselves starving and exhausted. Eventually, Darius was forced to retreat. The Scythians had shown that on the steppe, their way of life made them invincible. They were, quite literally, the masters of the steppe. While other empires built walls to keep invaders out, the Scythians needed no walls. The land itself was their fortress, their horses their defense, and their mobility their greatest weapon. Chapter 3. Daily life of the Scythians. When we picture the Scythians, it is easy to imagine only warriors, men on horseback, arrows flying. But to truly understand them, we must step closer into their daily lives. What did a Scythian family look like? How did they eat, dress, and survive in the harsh world of the steppe? The Scythians lived in clans and tribes, bound by kinship and loyalty. Families traveled together, sometimes in large groups, sometimes in smaller bands, depending on the season. Their homes were portable tents and wagons, built to be assembled and disassembled quickly. These structures were practical but also warm, lined with felt made from sheep's wool. Inside, families gathered around fires, cooking food, sharing stories, and preparing for the next move. Food was simple, but sustaining. Meat came from sheep, cattle, and horses. Milk was turned into cheese, butter, and fermented drinks like kumis, a slightly alcoholic beverage made from mare's milk. Herodotus, the Greek historian, describes Scythians drinking fermented horse milk, something strange to the Greeks, but a vital source of nutrition for the steppe. Hunting added variety, with deer, hares and wild animals supplementing the diet. Clothing was practical and designed for riding. Men and women alike wore trousers, a remarkable innovation at the time, since most ancient cultures still wore robes or tunics. For the Scythians, trousers allowed comfort and flexibility in the saddle. Tunics, cloaks, and tall pointed hats completed their outfits, often decorated with colourful patterns. In winter, heavy furs protected against the freezing winds. To outsiders, their appearance was exotic, yet every detail served a purpose. Perhaps most striking of all was the role of women. Unlike in many ancient civilizations, Scythian women did not stay hidden. Archaeological evidence shows that some women were buried with weapons, horses, and armor. Their skeletons bear the marks of combat wounds, suggesting that they fought alongside men. These warrior women may have inspired the Greek legends of the Amazons, fierce female fighters, said to live on the edge of the known world. To the Greeks, such tales seemed fantastical, but to the Scythians, women warriors were a reality. Children grew up in this environment of mobility and resilience. From a young age, boys and girls learned to ride horses, herd animals, and shoot bows. Life demanded early maturity, for the steppe was not a forgiving place. Yet it was also a life of freedom. No walls to confine, no kings to command from afar. Only the bonds of family, the needs of the herd, and the endless horizon. Religion and ritual were woven into daily life. The Scythians believed in gods tied to nature, the sun, the sky, the earth. Fires were sacred, and sacrifices were part of honoring the divine. Horses, being so central to their existence, often played roles in rituals. In some cases, entire herds were sacrificed to accompany a chief into the afterlife. Daily life was also rich with art. The Scythians decorated weapons, clothing, and even everyday objects with intricate patterns. They used bright dyes, embroidered textiles, and ornaments made of bronze and gold. Scenes of animals, deer, eagles, tigers, and mythical beasts adorned their belongings. These decorations were not merely for beauty, they carried symbolic meaning, representing strength, power, and protection. Despite their reputation as fierce warriors, daily Scythian life was filled with the ordinary rhythms of herding, cooking, raising children, and telling stories. To their neighbours, they appeared wild and untamed, but to themselves, theirs was a world of balance, between freedom and responsibility, between survival and ritual, between family bonds and the vast solitude of the steppe. Chapter 4. Art, Gold, and Tattoos. The Scythians were more than warriors and herders. They were also creators of some of the most striking and unique art of the ancient world. Unlike many nomadic cultures who left little behind, the Scythians adorned their lives with beauty, decorating their weapons, clothing, and even their very bodies. Perhaps the most famous of all Scythian creations are their golden treasures. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of golden ornaments, jewelry, and ceremonial items buried with Scythian nobles and chiefs. These pieces are not crude lumps of metal, but masterpieces of craftsmanship. Delicate, intricate, and filled with symbolism. The Scythians developed what is known as the animal style of art. Imagine a small golden plaque. On it, a stag leaps with antlers curling like branches, muscles flowing in stylized patterns. Or picture two lions locked in combat, their bodies intertwined in a swirl of power and motion. This was Scythian art, dynamic, alive, and deeply connected to nature. The choice of animals was not random. Stags, panthers, eagles, and wolves all appear again and again. Each carried meaning. The stag symbolized nobility and renewal. The eagle represented power from above. Predators like lions and panthers expressed ferocity and courage. By wearing these images, the Scythians wrapped themselves in the symbolic strength of the animals they revered. Gold was not only a sign of wealth, but also a spiritual material. It was eternal, untarnished, and radiant like the sun. To bury a chief with gold was to ensure that his spirit carried light and power into the afterlife. Whole suits of golden ornaments, buckles, plaques, necklaces, and rings have been found in Scythian tombs, glimmering even after thousands of years underground. But the Scythians did not only adorn objects, they also adorned their bodies. In the frozen tombs of Siberia, archaeologists discovered remarkably well-preserved mummies, their skins still bearing tattoos thousands of years old. The tattoos depict animals, stags, griffins, and fantastic creatures, inked in swirling, elegant designs. These tattoos may have been marks of identity, clan symbols, or spiritual charms meant to protect their wearers in life and death. One famous find, known as the Siberian Ice Princess, revealed a noblewoman covered in intricate tattoos from shoulder to wrist. Her clothing was richly decorated, and her burial included horses and fine goods. The discovery showed that tattooing was not limited to warriors, but was part of a broader cultural tradition, crossing gender and status. Even their weapons were works of art. Daggers, bows, and scabbards were inlaid with gold and decorated with animal figures. The act of war was thus tied to symbols of power and protection. To carry a sword with a golden griffin engraved upon it was not merely practical, it was spiritual. A reminder that the warrior fought with the strength of mythical beasts at his side. Through their art, the Scythians expressed their worldview. They lived in harmony with animals, relied on them for survival, and revered them as symbols of power. Their art was portable, just like their lives. Unlike cities with towering statues or temples, the Scythians carried their culture with them, in their jewelry, their clothing, their weapons, and their skin. These treasures, preserved in tombs for millennia, remind us that the Scythians were not simply rough nomads. They were artists, visionaries, and people who found beauty even in the harshest landscapes. Chapter 5. Religion and Myth. Behind the Scythians' art lay their spiritual world, a world filled with gods, rituals, and myths that gave meaning to their existence. Though they left no written records of their own, Greek historians, combined with archaeological evidence, give us glimpses into their beliefs. The Scythians worshipped a pantheon of deities, many linked to natural forces. Herodotus lists several gods, though he equates them with Greek counterparts. The most important was a goddess of fertility and earth, similar to the Greek goddess Hestia. There was also a god of the sky, a god of war, and deities connected to fire and rivers. Together, they represented the balance of nature: earth, sky, water, and fire. Rituals played a central role in honoring these powers. One of the most striking aspects of Scythian religion was their practice of sacrifice. Horses, above all, were offered to the gods and buried with their masters. In some royal tombs, archaeologists have found entire teams of horses, carefully arranged and decorated, meant to carry their chief into the afterlife. In rarer cases, even human sacrifices were performed, servants or prisoners buried alongside nobles to accompany them beyond death. Death for the Scythians was not an ending but a transition. Burials were elaborate and carefully planned. A noble's death triggered a long mourning period. According to Herodotus, the body was embalmed and carried on a wagon from one clan to another, each paying respect before the burial. Finally, the chief would be interred in a great mound, surrounded by riches, weapons, food, and animals. The kurgans, those great burial mounds still visible today, stand as monuments to this belief in an eternal journey. Fire was sacred. Rituals often involved burning offerings, purifying both the living and the dead. Weapons, animals, and even cannabis plants were cast into flames to release their spirit to the gods. Herodotus famously describes Scythians inhaling the smoke of hemp seeds, creating what he called a ritual of purification. Whether this was spiritual, medicinal, or communal, it reveals the importance of fire and smoke in connecting with the divine. The Scythians' myths reflected their life on the steppe. Herodotus recounts their origin myth, that the first Scythians were born from the union of Heracles and a strange half-woman, half-serpent creature. From this union came 3 sons, and the youngest Scythes, became the father of the Scythian people. This myth reveals both a connection to Greek storytelling and the Scythians' own sense of being born from the wild, from the strange and untamed. Another legend tells of a sacred golden plough, yoke, cup, and axe that fell from the sky. These objects became symbols of Scythian kingship. Only the rightful ruler could handle them without being burned. This myth reinforced the idea that their leaders were chosen not only by clan and blood, but by divine right. Religion also bound them together in war. Before battle, sacrifices were made, oaths sworn, and rituals performed to call upon the gods. Blood was sometimes mixed in a cup and shared among warriors as a symbol of unity and loyalty. Such acts bound clans into stronger units, making their armies as much spiritual brotherhoods as military forces. The Greeks, fascinated by these rituals, often exaggerated them, painting the Scythians as wild and savage. They wrote of skulls turned into drinking cups and gruesome sacrifices. While some of these accounts may have been true, they were also coloured by the Greeks' view of outsiders as barbarians. In truth, Scythian religion was both practical and profound. It tied their lives to the rhythms of nature, honoured their ancestors, and gave them strength to face the uncertainties of war and survival. To the Scythians, the gods were not distant beings in the sky, but ever-present forces in fire, wind, earth, and water. Their myths, their sacrifices, and their rituals were not the practices of savages, but the traditions of a people deeply attuned to the world around them. Chapter 6. Scythians in War. If the Scythians were remembered for one thing above all else, it was their skill in war. To their enemies, they were terrifying horsemen who could appear and vanish like ghosts. To their allies, they were invaluable mercenaries who brought speed and precision unmatched by any other soldiers of the ancient world. The secret of Scythian warfare was mobility. Every warrior was also a rider, and every rider carried the same devastating weapon, the composite bow. Unlike the simple wooden bows used in many cultures, the Scythian bow was made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, glued together and curved into a distinctive shape. It was short, allowing it to be used on horseback, but incredibly powerful. A skilled archer could shoot with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed. This gave the Scythians a tactical advantage that few armies could overcome. Heavy infantry, like those of Greece or Persia, relied on standing their ground. But against the Scythians, standing still meant death. Clouds of arrows rained down on them from every direction. If an enemy charged, the Scythians wheeled away, luring them farther into the plains before striking again. One of their most famous tactics was the Parthian shot, though it was used long before the Parthians. A rider would feign retreat, turning his horse as if to flee. Then, twisting in the saddle, he would fire backward at full speed, striking pursuers who believed they had the advantage. This ability to shoot in all directions while riding made the Scythians nearly untouchable in open battle. Beyond their bows, Scythians also carried short swords, axes, and spears for close combat. But they preferred to wear down enemies from a distance, avoiding direct clashes whenever possible. Their armor was typically light, scale armor made of leather and bronze, or sometimes hardened hide. Helmets and shields added protection, but speed mattered more than heavy defense. A Scythian warrior's greatest shield was the horse beneath him and the vast openness of the steppe. Scythian warriors were not only men. As we've seen, women sometimes fought as well. Burial evidence shows female skeletons interred with weapons, arrows, and armor. Some even bore scars of combat, proving they had lived and died by the sword. To the Greeks, this was shocking, and it fueled their myths of the Amazons, fierce women who lived on the edges of the known world. In truth, Scythian society simply demanded that all its members be skilled in survival and defense. The Scythians also had a fearsome reputation for ruthlessness. Herodotus claimed they drank the blood of their first enemy slain in battle, and that they took scalps and heads as trophies. While these accounts may have been exaggerated, Archaeological finds confirm that trophy-taking did occur. To the Scythians, victory was not just a matter of survival. It was an honor to be celebrated, marked, and remembered. Perhaps the most famous test of their military power came against the Persian Empire. In 513 BC, Darius the Great led a massive army across the Danube River into Scythian territory. His goal was to crush these elusive nomads who had long harassed Persia's northern borders, but the Scythians refused to fight him directly. Instead, they retreated deeper and deeper into the steppe, burning crops, poisoning wells, and harassing the Persians with quick raids. Frustrated, Darius sent a message demanding they stand and fight. The Scythian king, Idan replied with chilling calm. "We Scythians have no cities or cultivated lands to fight for, and we fear no conqueror. If you must fight us, then try to find the graves of our fathers, disturb them, and you will see how we Scythians fight to the death." Unable to bring the Scythians to battle, Darius eventually retreated, his great campaign a failure. The lesson was clear. On the open steppe, the Scythians were unbeatable. Their reputation spread far and wide. Greek city-states along the Black Sea sometimes hired them as mercenaries, both fearing and admiring their skill. Even centuries later, Roman writers remembered the Scythians as the archetype of the barbarian horseman, wild, free, and deadly. In war, the Scythians were more than raiders. They were a mirror held up to the civilizations they confronted, showing the limits of stone walls and heavy armies. Against the speed of the horse and the sting of the bow, empires learned that power could not always march in neat lines or stand in sturdy ranks. Sometimes power was a shadow, vanishing and striking again, like the wind across the endless grasslands. Chapter 7. Encounters with the great civilizations. While the Scythians themselves left no written records, they appear often in the histories of other civilizations. To the Greeks, Persians, and later the Romans, the Scythians were both neighbors and nightmares. Traders at times, raiders at others, and always a presence impossible to ignore. Their relationship with the Greeks was particularly complex. Along the northern shores of the Black Sea, Greek colonists established cities such as Olbia and Chersonesus. These cities traded extensively with the Scythians, exchanging wine, olive oil, and fine pottery for grain, furs, and slaves. Greek pottery depicting Scythian warriors has been found in Scythian burial mounds, showing how far their trade reached. But trade was not always peaceful. At times, Scythian raids threatened these same colonies. The Greeks both feared and romanticized their northern neighbors. Herodotus devoted long passages to describing their customs, fascinated by their freedom and toughness. Playwrights in Athens used Scythian characters in comedies, often portraying them as crude but honest archers. To the Greeks, the Scythians embodied both the dangers and the allure of life beyond civilization. With the Persians, the relationship was more openly hostile. As we've seen, Darius the Great's failed campaign revealed Persia's difficulty in confronting a nomadic enemy. Yet the Persians also employed Scythian mercenaries in their armies, valuing their skills even as they feared their independence. This dual relationship, enemy and ally, was a pattern repeated across history whenever sedentary empires met nomadic powers. The Scythians also left their mark on the Near East. During the 7th century BC, Scythian groups pushed into the Middle East, raiding as far as Syria and Palestine. Some ancient texts even describe them attacking the city of Ashkelon. For nearly 3 decades, they were a dominant force in the region, feared by Assyrians, Medes, and others. Eventually, they withdrew back to the steppe, but their presence left scars on the memory of the ancient Near East. By the time of the Romans, the Scythians as a distinct people had already begun to fade, replaced by other nomadic groups like the Sarmatians. Yet Roman writers still spoke of them as the quintessential barbarians of the north. The word Scythian even became a generic term in Roman literature for steppe nomads, long after the original Scythians were gone. Encounters with these civilizations also shaped how the Scythians saw themselves. Contact with Greek traders introduced them to new goods and ideas. Goldworking techniques, pottery designs, and even myths blended into their own culture. At the same time, their clashes with Persia and others reinforced their identity as a people who could not be conquered, who could stand apart from the empires of stone and remain free in the open grasslands. In these encounters, we see the paradox of the Scythians. They were outsiders to the great civilizations of the ancient world, yet deeply connected to them. They traded, fought, allied, and opposed. They influenced and were influenced. They lived beyond the walls of cities, but their shadows stretched into the heart of every empire that knew their name. Chapter 8. The Decline of the Scythians. Every civilization, no matter how powerful, eventually meets its twilight. For the Scythians, decline came not as a single dramatic collapse, but as a gradual fading, a steady erosion of power on the vast canvas of the steppe. By the 3rd century BC, new nomadic peoples began pressing into Scythian lands. Chief among them were the Sarmatians, another Iranian-speaking people from the east. The Sarmatians shared many of the Scythians' traits: horseback warfare, nomadic lifestyle, and warrior culture, but they began to outcompete and displace the older Scythian tribes. Over generations, Scythian dominance gave way to Sarmatian ascendancy. The pressures did not come only from the east. To the south, Greek colonies grew stronger, sometimes aligning with Sarmatians or other groups against the Scythians. To the west, Thracians and Celts expanded, pressing on their borders. The once fluid power of the Scythians became hemmed in by both new nomads and the encroaching edges of settled empires. Another factor in their decline was sedentarization. Some Scythian groups, particularly those around the northern Black Sea, began to adopt more settled ways of life. They built permanent towns, engaged in farming, and became more reliant on trade with Greek neighbors. While this brought prosperity, it also meant losing the full mobility that had made them invincible for centuries. Once tied to fixed places, they were more vulnerable to invasion and less able to adapt to shifting pressures on the steppe. By the time of the Roman Empire, the Scythians were no longer the dominant power of the steppes. Some groups survived in Crimea and along the lower Dniester River, but they were minor players compared to the rising Goths, Sarmatians, and later the Huns. In the 2nd century AD, a small Scythian kingdom still clung to existence in Crimea, centered around the city of Scythian Neapolis. But even this final outpost was eventually swept away by new waves of nomadic invaders. It is tempting to ask, what destroyed the Scythians? The truth is more subtle. They were not destroyed in the sense of sudden annihilation. Rather, they were absorbed, transformed, and replaced. Their bloodlines lived on in the peoples who followed them. Their traditions of horsemanship, archery, and nomadic warfare became the template for generations of steppe conquerors, from the Sarmatians and Alans to the Huns, Avars, and eventually the Mongols. The Scythians vanished, but their way of life did not. It endured across the steppe for over 2,000 years, shaping the history of Eurasia again and again. Chapter 9. Rediscovery of the Scythians. For centuries after their decline, the Scythians existed mostly in memory, half history, half legend. Greek and Roman authors preserved tales of their customs, but without a living people to represent them, the Scythians faded into the background of ancient history. It was not until the modern age that the Scythians were truly rediscovered. Beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries, Russian explorers and archaeologists began excavating the great kurgans scattered across the steppes. What they found astonished the world. Buried beneath those grassy mounds lay treasure troves of Scythian art, weapons, and ornaments. Gold plaques depicting animals, warriors, and mythic beasts shone as brightly as the day they were made. Weapons of bone, bronze, and iron lay beside the remains of long-dead warriors. Horses, still adorned with ornate saddles and harnesses, lay buried beside their masters, testifying to the deep bond between Scythian rider and steed. Even more remarkable were the finds in Siberia, where permafrost preserved Scythian remains in astonishing detail. At sites such as Pazyryk in the Altai Mountains, archaeologists uncovered mummies of Scythian nobles with tattoos still visible on their skin, spirals, animals, and mythical creatures inked in dark blue. These discoveries revealed a culture of startling sophistication, artistry, and individuality. Through these archaeological finds, the Scythians emerged not just as barbarian horsemen, but as a people of deep culture, with rich spiritual beliefs, artistic traditions, and a striking sense of identity. Their gold work, in particular, stands as some of the most intricate and beautiful of the ancient world, so much so that Russian czars proudly displayed Scythian treasures in their royal collections. In modern times, the Scythians have captured imaginations once more. Historians, archaeologists, and geneticists have studied their remains, uncovering clues about their origins and migrations. Their role in connecting East and West has become clearer, showing how nomadic peoples shaped the Silk Road centuries before it even existed. They also live on in myth. The tales of Amazons, fierce warrior women, now seem less like fantasy and more like distorted echoes of Scythian reality. The legendary barbarians of the north, long dismissed as uncivilized, now appear as a people every bit as complex and influential as the empires they once defied. Conclusion: the legacy of the Scythians. As our journey ends, let us return to where we began, the endless steppe, where wind bends the grass like waves across a sea without shore. This was the world of the Scythians, a people who lived without cities, without walls, without kings seated on golden thrones. Yet from that world, they forged a legacy that endured for millennia. The Scythians were warriors and wanderers, artists and traders, raiders and allies. They terrified Persia, intrigued Greece, and haunted Rome. They carved animals into gold, inked them onto their skin, and dreamed of them in their myths. They buried their dead in great mounds, not only with weapons, but with horses, companions for eternity. Though they disappeared as a people, they never truly vanished. Their spirit rode on in every nomadic horde that thundered westward across Eurasia. From Attila's Huns to Genghis Khan's Mongols, the echoes of Scythian hoofbeats resounded again and again. Today, their memory comes not from fear, but from fascination. In museums across the world, Scythian gold gleams under glass. In books and documentaries, their name stirs curiosity. And on the steppes, their kurgans still rise, silent witnesses to lives once lived in freedom beneath the open sky. The Scythians remind us of a profound truth. Civilization does not only belong to those who build cities and monuments. It also belongs to those who live with the land, who carry their world with them, who measure wealth not in walls, but in horses, skill, and the stories they leave behind. In the end, the Scythians were not forgotten. They are with us still, in legend, in art, in history, and in the eternal mystery of the steppe. Thanks for watching today's episode of AFK History. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more. Share it with your friends to help us grow. We truly appreciate your support, and we've got plenty more content on the way.